Imagine a world where you can go anywhere, do anything, and the choices you make truly impact the virtual city around you. In 2001, Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto 3, a game that revolutionized open world gaming and redefined what video games could be. With its massive living city, groundbreaking freedom of choice, and controversial mature themes, Grand Theft Auto 3 set the standard for an entire genre and left a permanent mark on the gaming industry. Today, we're diving into the creation, impact, and legacy of Grand Theft Auto 3, the game that made Liberty City a household name and changed gaming forever. So buckle up and get ready for some chaos as we take another trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 217th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are diving into the chaotic streets of Grand Theft Auto 3. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, who definitely shouldn't be trusted behind the wheel of Liberty City. He's my brother, Rob Casson. So, Rob, if you were to let loose in Liberty City for a day, what's the first thing that you do?
Uh, well, Dave, you gotta take a really nice car. Doesn't matter where you get it from. You just gotta take it.
That's you know, that's actually a very valid point because you can, right? That's an open world like this. That is 100% what you can do. You can just go into any store, any city, and do what you want, and that's really the draw of an open city, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it doesn't even have to be from a store either, Dave. Someone's driving a nice car and I see it. Well, it's mine now.
Just carjack them and move on with your day.
Damn straight.
Cool.
As long as you get them out of the car far enough that you can drive away, what are they gonna do? Catch you in their stolen car?
No, they're definitely not going to catch you in their stolen car. Well, I know you're familiar with Grand Theft Auto 3.
I've played it.
You've played it a little bit, a little
Yeah,
bit, a little bit.
a little bit.
So, we're not going into this blind, neither of us, which is nice. We got a lot to talk about. So, before we get to the history of Grand Theft Auto 3, why don't you take a few minutes and tell our listeners what else released during this week in gaming history?
Kicking it off on October 23rd, 1988, Super Mario Bros. 3 was released for the Famicom in Japan, developed and published by Nintendo. Widely regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time, Super Mario Bros. 3 introduced groundbreaking gameplay mechanics, such as the overworld map, new power-ups like the Super Leaf, allowing Mario to fly, and the iconic Koopalings as boss characters. The game featured a variety of themed worlds, each filled with unique enemies, obstacles, and secrets, offering players an incredible amount of creativity and replayability. Super Mario Bros. 3 was praised for tight controls, innovative level design, and significant expansion of the Mario universe. Its impact on the platforming genre and gaming as a whole is immeasurable, cementing its legacy as a timeless classic.
Very much as a timeless classic. It's hard to understate how much that revolutionized platform gaming at the time, and definitely, at least to me, probably the best NES title on the platform.
I do agree. It was a fantastic one. You can't go wrong with Mario and Super Mario at that.
No, you can't go wrong at all.
And speaking of Super Mario, on October 21st, 1992, Super Mario Land 2 Six Golden Coins was released for the Game Boy. Developed and published by, guess who? Nintendo!
Nintendo.
Woo! As a sequel to Super Mario Land, this game introduced players to a larger world with improved graphics and gameplay. Mario embarks on a quest to reclaim his castle from Wario, making his debut as the main antagonist. The game featured diverse creative levels, including areas like a giant tree, a haunted house, and outer space, all accessible through a non-linear overworld map. Super Mario Land 2 was praised for engaging level design, enhanced visuals, and new power-ups like Bunny Mario. It became a standout title for the Game Boy, especially with the introduction of Wario, who would become a key character in future Mario games.
I remember playing that when it first came out. We had it on the Game Boy, and it was a fun addition to the Game Boy library. But it was a Game Boy game, right? So you only took those so seriously because they were handheld games, and never in a million years.
Whoa, brother.
I'm telling you, like,
No. You gotta back up. Handheld games, not. No. You want to go back to my Pokemon Red, my Pokemon Yellow, any of the ones from Emerald?
that's probably one of the exceptions because, in general, handheld games weren't what carried or started franchises, really. I don't think more of that started to happen until later on. But back then, especially because this was Super Mario Land 2, this was just a Mario game that was more basic than actual Mario. You know what I mean?
All right, if we're not talking. Okay, they're obviously outliers. All right, I'll shut up.
No, you actually made a very valid point that I didn't think of. Pokemon is 100% a handheld game that has held its own and then some. And there are other examples. You know, we've talked about Professor Layton, and we've talked about, I really don't know any other handheld games that have held their own, but you know, um,
We talked about Game and Watch. That's held its own.
yeah, I mean, but there are others. But back when, like, these were just games that we got to play our favorite series in the handheld version, not knowing their significance. Wario was just another character. We never knew that Wario was going to become a mainstay for the series at the time. You know.
No, you're absolutely right.
So, all right, what else we got?
Well, on October 20th, 1995, Psygnosis released Destruction Derby for the PlayStation, a game that brought the chaotic excitement of Demolition Derby racing to the world of video games. Destruction Derby allowed players to compete in destructive car races, where the objective was not just to finish first, but also to cause as much damage to opponents' vehicles as possible. The game was praised for its realistic physics, which accurately depicted the damage inflicted on cars during collisions, and its thrilling gameplay that combined speed with strategic wrecking. Destruction Derby became one of the early hits on the PlayStation, helping to popularize the console and laying the groundwork for future vehicular combat games.
I was addicted to that game because it was car destruction, the likes of which I had never seen before. And I just remember spending hours upon hours wrecking cars in that game. That was a good one for me. That was a very good one for me. So
Yeah, I do remember playing some games like that, but I don't know if I ever played that specific one. But, I love the Destruction Derby games. They're so fun.
yeah, I know. I know.
So fun. Next up, on October 25th, 1999, Williams, a dominant force in the pinball industry for decades, officially ceased pinball productions to focus on the more profitable slot machine and gambling markets. Williams, under the Bally Midway division, had produced some of the most iconic pinball machines of all time, such as the Addams Family, Twilight Zone, and Funhouse. Despite their innovation and leadership in the industry, declining sales and changing market dynamics made the business unsustainable. The company's departure from pinball manufacturing marked the end of an era for the golden age of pinball, as they had been one of the last major players in the field. Williams' exit was a lasting impact on pinball history, though their machines continued to be revered by collectors and enthusiasts worldwide.
Worldwide.
Yeah. I didn't know. I mean, I've obviously seen the Addams Family, Twilight Zone, and Funhouse, but I never could have told you, oh, that's a Williams pinball machine.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but still cool. Last up for this week, on October 26th, 2004, Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto San Andreas for the PlayStation 2, the seventh entry in the Grand Theft Auto series. Set in the fictional state of San Andreas, which is modeled after, shockingly, California and Nevada, the game follows protagonist Carl C.J. Johnson as he returns home to Los Santos after the death of his mother. San Andreas introduced several groundbreaking features, including a vast open world, RPG like character customization, and new gameplay mechanics such as swimming, flying, and gang warfare. The game's rich storyline, engaging characters, and expansive environment allowed for unprecedented player freedom, making it one of the most ambitious and influential titles of its time. GTA San Andreas received widespread critical acclaim and became one of the best selling video games of all time, solidifying its place as a landmark title in open world gaming. But we're not here to talk about San Andreas.
No.
Instead, we're going to go look at Grand Theft Auto 3. So, Dave, take it away and tell us all about it.
There was already talk about bringing the Grand Theft Auto series into the realm of 3D even before the team was finished on Grand Theft Auto 2. Now, we've talked about this team before when we covered the origins of Grand Theft Auto itself back in episode 112. And in that episode, we learned about how it was originally going to be a car racing slash crashing game called Race and Chase that eventually evolved into the top down Grand Theft Auto that laid the groundwork for this revolutionary series. And we also further learned about its development studio, DMA Design, when we learned about the video game Lemmings, which was in episode 129. So if you want to learn more about DMA Design or you want to learn more about the beginning of the Grand Theft Auto series, I would suggest going back and checking out either of those episodes to learn more about it. So we're kind of going to pick up towards the end of Grand Theft Auto 2. It was during the development of Grand Theft Auto 2 that the studio was inevitably acquired by Take-Two Interactive. And that acquisition introduced them to Take-Two executives Sam Houser and Dan Houser. And the Houser brothers would form Rockstar Games as the high-end publishing label of Take-Two Interactive. Now, we've also learned about the Houser brothers before and kind of this process. They were instrumental in revolutionizing the Red Dead series from Red Dead Revolver over to Red Dead Redemption that we all know and love today. We did a whole episode on it, so if you want to learn about that, go check that out. Whole lot of past history here if you want to get in there. But as part of that story, we learned that the brothers were very keen on really developing open world immersive games. And it was during the development of Grand Theft Auto 2 that they would really, this acquisition would take place and they would really get into the acquired studios and start to express that sentiment to their teams, so to speak. In a 2022 Games Radar interview, Aaron Garbett, the head of development and co-studio head at Rockstar Games, who has happened to work on every Grand Theft Auto since its inception, had said that Sam Houser was always keen. He was always keen to see the Grand Theft Auto series move to 3D, but it wasn't so much of a plan in the beginning as it was a desire. The original team that had worked on Grand Theft Auto 2 had tried pushing the camera behind the car a little bit in some of the tests for Grand Theft Auto 2. He said, but there were still a few of us who were really excited by the possibilities of freely modeling a world that would stream as needed and moving the camera right up into it. So, as the team was wrapping up work on the second game in the series, they took this settlement, this desire to model a 3D world, to kind of build a breathable city that they were thinking about during the development of GTA 2. And they began to create a prototype for the Sega Dreamcast. For this prototype, the team created city blocks using brownstones, they made some docks, they created some retail areas, and they even began to breathe some life into it by modeling vehicles and pedestrians into these city blocks. Now, elsewhere at DMA and otherwise, Rockstar Games had really started to pressure their other studios to create an open 3D world. And specifically, they pushed one of the other teams at DMA Design to make it happen. Now, this group had just designed and finished a 1998 platform game for the Nintendo 64 called Space Station Silicon Valley. Alan Jack, one of the support engineers at DMA Design, had mentioned in a 2024 Time Extension article that it was another project that had essentially grown out of a combination of Body Harvest open world roaming mechanics and Space Station Silicon Valley's final level that was a city full of vehicles. He recalled seeing a tech demo on a Dreamcast development kit that demonstrated cars whizzing around in 3D with beautiful lights and full deformation of the car bodies. So a team was gathered, right? And they were basically asked to make something that was 3D using this city prototype on the Dreamcast. So at this point, we've got the two teams. A decision was made at that point for the second team to transform the project from a generic city based tech demo. Basically, they knew this other team was working on Grand Theft Auto and they didn't want to infringe on Grand Theft Auto. So they decided that they were going to start modeling this game over an unused Godzilla license that the studio had. So the Silicon Valley team starts tackling the desire to create a 3D game from that perspective, right? They're now thinking that they're going to make a 3D Godzilla game. In the meantime, there's another team that is playing around with the concept of a new Grand Theft Auto, and everyone's doing this on a Dreamcast, okay? But this is all happening again during the time in which DMA Design was being acquired by Take Two. And what we learned as part of the story when we looked at it from the Red Dead Redemption perspective was that many changes were being made within the studios at the time. And in particular, one of the changes that was happening here was that Rockstar acquired DMA Design, took them under their wing, and then they moved the studio from their original home in Dundee to a new location in Edinburgh. Edinburgh? How do you say it? Edinburgh?
Uh,
I don't know.
Edinburgh?
That city that I just butchered, and I have a friend in Ireland who's going to listen to this and make fun of me for no end, and that's cool. I'm good with that. So they moved their location and they changed to Rockstar North. As part of that decision, the two teams were merged. The Silicon Valley team and the Grand Theft Auto 2 teams. They were merged into a single entity. And to kind of further the idea of why I harkened back to the Red Dead episode, at that point, we learned that the Take Two executives, the Hauser brothers specifically, at Rockstar, had started to evaluate projects to determine which were going to be the more viable solutions moving forward to make money. In that case, they took Red Dead Revolver, made it into Red Dead Redemption. And in this case, they looked at Grand Theft Auto 3 and they looked at a Godzilla license and they basically said, yo, I think Grand Theft Auto 3 is what's going to make the money. So the Godzilla license was thrown to the side and they determined that the team was going to be working on Grand Theft Auto 3 moving forward.
Damn, we missed that on a Godzilla game.
I know, right? That's
Yes.
ridiculous.
Could have Godzilla in GTA. Godzilla cool. San Andreas. Let's go.
So for the next 4 months, this team basically worked on developing Grand Theft Auto 3 for the Sega Dreamcast.
Oh.
During this time, however, as the teams at Take Two slash Rockstar began to dive into it, it became clear that the Dreamcast was not a commercially viable alternative when compared to the Sony PlayStation 2. Basically, it's going to make more money on the PlayStation 2. So that's where we're going. So the bean counters, so to speak, made the decision to switch development over to Sony's platform.
Hmm. Neat.
Now, even though the decision was made from the financial standpoint, there were many members of the team that were thrilled with the decision to move over to the PlayStation 2. They knew that the PlayStation's hardware, they knew that the PlayStation storage, they knew that its accessibility to the masses after the success of PlayStation, the support they would get from Sony. There were a whole lot of reasons why they knew that this was going to be a better choice for them. They were excited specifically by the new hardware. They were excited by the storage. Aaron Garbut stated in a different interview that he felt that other video games at the time were a thing you played. Well, going into this, the team wanted Grand Theft Auto 3 to be a place that you lived in,
Ooh.
right? And so the team wanted to expand on the concepts that they introduced in the first two games. Basically, they wanted to turn the freedom and the diversity of the previous games into a living, breathing 3D world using the power of the PlayStation 2. Rob, that's like the power of friendship.
I don't know that it is, Dave.
Because the PlayStation 2 would use DVDs instead of CDs that the last generation used, they knew that they had extra space allotted to them, right? And
Sure.
so extra hardware on the PS2, extra storage space on the DVDs was going to equate to, the ability to be more creative. Now, we know that this team eventually based this 3D world on Liberty City, which they got from the 2D Grand Theft Autos. But the truth of the matter is that it did not start out that way. Initially, they sat down and they designed a hybrid city that was, as Dan Hauser once described it in an interview, a post-industrial Midwest slash East Coast generic, deliberately generic feeling American city.
So almost what they went with in San Andreas?
Maybe.
Hmm.
What they came to realize, though, as they started to really map this out, is a concept that, in my opinion, has continued to stick with them throughout the development of the entire series. And that concept is that if you base your design on a real place, you have more things to say about it. So the decision was made to model it as Liberty City, which, as we know, was in fact modeled after New York City.
I did not know that.
So one of the struggles that the team had while working on this process, namely, was just converting all of the game elements into a full 3D world. And that was just simply because of the sheer volume that was required, right? When you move from 2D to 3D, you have more of everything. More people, more objects. I guess not more people, but it equated to in this case, right? More people, more objects, more textures. Everything in 2D was literally squared up in terms of need, right? Because now we need to go from 2D to 3D. My math doesn't check out on that, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even the audio requirements were increased, right? Because they're going from a little game to now a living, breathing world where you want you want it to be alive. So it needs to sound like a city. People need to sound like people. You have to actually flesh it out and make it a believable place, and that is very much something that you do also by audio design. You know what I mean?
Uh, yeah.
So even for Grand Theft Auto 3, there was a ton of dialogue. Audio programmer Raymond Usher in an interview estimated that they had recorded about 18,000 lines of dialogue to put the world together. In another interview, Dan Hauser had said there was only 8,000. So somewhere between 8,000 and 18,000 lines of dialogue. Either way, impressive for a PS2 era game in 2001. Um, and so they worked and put this all together. They did motion capture and they brought that into 3D. And there was just all these requirements to just bring the sheer volume of 3D onto a video game platform. And overcoming the sheer scale of this concept was a constant design challenge for the team at DMA Design. You know, we've been talking about hardware and space, but part of the hardware was a limitation. They may have had more space via the DVD, but the PS2 only had 32 megabytes of RAM to work with. So they had to learn how to make the world a living, breathing thing while working within the constraints of 32 megabytes of space, so to speak, right? Because that's all you can use at one time. And so that was a challenge that they faced as they worked through the entire game. While the team worked on the technical part of the game, they also developed the story. Dan Hauser said in a 2013 interview, "We used the story to expose the mechanics, and we used the mechanics to tell the story." So basically, the team developed the story and the design simultaneously. He and his co-writer James Worrell, they drew inspiration from films like The Warriors, Taxi Driver, Scarface, Payback. They got a lot of their gangster stuff from stories about the mafia. So there was a lot of inspiration that came from different places. When writing the story, they regularly met with designers. They filled an entire room with post it notes to reconstruct the story components and shape the game. Hauser said that while doing so, they approached each mission as its own short story and part of an overarching story. Even still, he said it was challenging to create a narrative to begin with because they wanted to create a viable story that still gave players freedom within this living, breathing world that they've created, right?
Yeah.
So basically, they had to find a way to create a story and not just subject people to a chaotic city with no goal in mind, or the opposite, where you're constantly guiding people from place to place and not really giving them any freedom in the situation. Rob, let's take a quick break from the chaos of Liberty City. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast?
All the time. But honestly, the idea of setting everything up can feel overwhelming, so where do we even start?
Well, that's where our friends at Zencaster come in. Zencaster has built an all in one podcasting platform that makes it incredibly easy to create your own show. You can record high quality audio, high quality video, all from your web browser. There is no extra software, no extra equipment needed whatsoever.
Wait, so I can record a podcast with 4K video and crystal clear audio just using my browser?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do need a microphone or a webcam or something that can pick you up, but absolutely. Zencaster even handles post production for you. It automatically removes background noise, levels out your audio, and just makes sure that everything sounds buttery smooth. Plus, you can easily trim out those awkward pauses, those ums and ahs with just a few clicks of a button.
That sounds awesome. What about distributing the podcast to places like Spotify or Apple?
Zencaster has you covered there too. With their all in one platform, you can distribute your podcast to all the major platforms directly from their site. It's never been easier to get your voice out to the world.
Well, I'm sold. Is there a way for our listeners to try?
Of course, head over to zencaster.com/pricing and you can use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You'll get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. So if you've got a great idea for a podcast, there has never been a better time to get started.
Sounds like it's time to make my podcasting dreams a reality.
That is so very true. So, listeners and Rob, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast, check out Zencaster and get 30% off your first month with our offer code Memory Card Lane. Start your podcast journey today and share your stories with the world.
Now, let's get back to the streets of Liberty City.
So, before Grand Theft Auto 3 was released to the world, the team did have to make a series of changes to the game for various reasons. Perhaps the biggest reason that changes were made was because of the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Just after the attacks, Rockstar announced a 3 week delay to the release date of the game to allow them to make various changes to the title in light of the terrorist attacks. One of the initial changes made was the color of the police cars, Rob. Originally, they were going to be blue and white, kind of like how the iconic police cars are in New York City, but they kind of tried to separate themselves a little bit more from New York in light of September 11th. So they changed their police cars to a generic black and white color scheme that you find in many other American cities. Black and white, black and white.
That's not quite how it goes, Dave.
No.
No.
So, some of the other changes they made included altering the flight path of a plane to avoid appearing to fly into or behind a skyscraper. They didn't want to give that away. They removed a mission referencing terrorists. And then they had to make some changes to pedestrian dialogue. They had to make some changes to talk radio. So, lots of
Damn.
things
What did they
going
have
on.
in there that couldn't that they had to change all that?
Well, it was a very sensitive time. It was an incredibly sensitive time. So we were nothing like that had ever happened before. We were navigating uncharted territory, and there was a tendency to not want to offend anybody in any way because it was so new. Rob, this game was released 41 days after September 11th.
No. I understand that. I'm just curious, like, what was in there that would
Yeah.
have.
I don't know. I don't know specifically about the details other than that, but they said I did see an interview with Dan Houser where they asked how much stuff was cut out, and he said basically less than 1%. Like it was so little, aside from the plane and the terrorist mission, there wasn't much about it. I will tell you, probably the biggest change to us here in the US was the cover of the game itself. So there are actually four different covers of this game depending on the version. And the European cover was going to be our cover here in the United States, but it has skyscrapers on it and an explosion, not reminiscent of the Twin Towers, but the fact that they were both on a cover that was considered to be too insensitive. And so they made the decision to nix that cover for our region and do another. And literally, one of the Hauser brothers, had sat down and said, like, they sat down and drew the current cover in like a night, like a Saturday night. And it's now, honestly, it's become so iconic. And it's such an iconic cover for the series at this point. And it was just happenstance that it happened.
True.
But if you want to see what our original cover is supposed to look like, just Google European Grand Theft Auto 3 cover, and you can see roughly what our stuff looks like. And like I said, I mean, this came quick. It was released 41 days after 9/11, and that gives the team, I mean, probably only about 30 days, if not a tiny bit more, to make changes. Probably not even, because you have to finish your game back when it wasn't digital, right? So they would have to finish the game, they would have had to go gold with it, they would have had to print all the discs. It's not like they can do those and ship those out in a week. So my guess is that 2 weeks, maybe they had a week, maybe they had 10 days to actually make the changes, and then they had to retool everything for new covers and new discs and so on and so forth.
Yeah, pretty crazy when you actually put it into perspective like that.
Yeah, it's not like nowadays where someone can do a day one patch and commit to things. Things were very different back when. This was early on in the multiplayer era. They did prototype an online multiplayer component to this, but it was nixed early on in that. So what else? They had another character that they nixed that some people reference, like, because it was a Middle Eastern character, if I'm not mistaken, that people are often like, oh, they got rid of it because of 9/11. But Hauser's come out and said, nah, that character was nixed well before 9/11. That's not content that we cut in response to the terrorist attacks. So it came out. October 23rd, 2001, 23 years ago. Also crazy to think about. I didn't point it out, but when you did the San Andreas plug earlier, 20 years from San Andreas. How flippin' nuts is that?
That's yeah,
2004. It's been 20 years since San Andreas came out. That was such. I mean, both of these were just revolutionary games. First, this one, Revolution Series going to 3D. And I'm not saying that, Vice City didn't, but I do think that San Andreas was the next significant step in the series that revolutionized it again, way more than Vice City did. So I think that those are two iconic games, and it's really crazy to think that it's been 23 and 20 years, you know?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
insane.
I know. I know. I was having a conversation with one of my college friends the other day, and we had said, yeah, we've been doing this for 20 years. We both stopped, like, oh my God, we can honestly say we've been doing this for 20 years. This sucks. Because we graduated from college, 18 years ago. So we've known each other for over 20 years now,
Yeah,
Anyway, Grand Theft Auto 3. I I remember when it came out. It was amazing. There's no other way to put it. It was amazing. There were other games that were doing 3D at the time. Like I remember I was super addicted to a game called Driver, which they used no, they borrowed some influence from Driver. And Driver was a living breathing city that was driving, pretty much just driving. I mean, it had a little bit of get out of the car, but it was pretty much just driving. And I remember that was so cool because like the traffic lights turn red. I remember that being the first game I remember that had actual traffic lights, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like we're actually in cities now. But that wasn't nearly as big or anything as this, and that was mostly a driving game. So in turn, like this came out, and this just blew my freaking mind. I mean, it blew everyone's mind to be absolutely honest. Blew absolutely everyone's mind. I remember playing this for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. This was an amazing, amazing game. You did you honestly spend a lot of time with this one?
I don't. I did not spend a lot of time with this one. Most of mine started with Vice City,
Gotcha.
and then obviously San Andreas was probably my most played out of the PlayStation 2s. But I definitely did play a bit of it. It was, like you said, it's a revolutionary game. Having played the originals for PlayStation, where it was the 2D top down, it was like, holy crap, this is awesome. Um, but I don't know, there had to have been something else out around the same time that took most of my time until Vice City came out.
Everybody loved this game. Honestly, even to this day, it rates incredibly well. It sits at a 97 on Metacritic. It's tied with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, excellent game, as the highest rated PS2 game on the site. So big fans of both of them. And it's actually like the sixth or seventh best rated game of all time on the site. Like it's definitely, it might got knocked down by some recent ones, but it's definitely a top 10 best rated game of all time. It was the highest selling game of 2001, despite coming in like being released at the end of October. Think about that for a second.
Yeah, that's pretty insane.
Highest selling game of 2001 in 2 months. That's how insanely popular this game was. It was also the second best selling game of 2002, coming in just behind its sequel, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. So,
I mean, that's pretty damn impressive.
yeah, it's very impressive. Very, very impressive. All in all, it has sold about 15 million copies worldwide. Just absolute, dominating, sold everything, did everything, all the fun stuff. There is no doubt that this was a powerhouse.
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt. You couldn't deny it. I mean, come on, you were able to engage with prostitutes and get your money back.
I know, which brings us to a great segue because this game definitely was not without controversy, right? Which, given what you just said, should come as no surprise. GameSpy actually awarded it Most Offensive Game of the Year, calling it absolutely reprehensible. that is such a that is
It's
such
fitting.
that is such a strong word. absolutely reprehensible. Like, that language is so freaking powerful. They wrote that the game rewards players for quote unquote causing mayhem and killing innocent people by the dozen, questioning its appropriateness. As you said, the game allows players to participate in sexual activities with prostitutes and murder them to reclaim the payment, which was met with widespread controversy. In January 2002, a couple months later, the National Organization for Women called for Rockstar and Take-Two to withdraw the game from sales as it encourages violence and the degradation of women. The game also received backlash for its depiction of crime and for allowing violence against police officers. There was so much notoriety around this game that this is the sole reason why Walmart started to check identification of purchasers who appeared under the age of 17 when purchasing mature titles. And honestly, I don't think just Walmart, a lot of retailers, because I worked at Best Buy shortly after, a lot of retailers picked up the same practice about the same time as a result of the Grand Theft Auto games, period. It's, even with the controversy, it is, it's really hard to put into words how influential this game has been to, I mean, I'm going to go on the video game history limb here, but video game design, period. Like, it is an incredibly influential game. It is considered to have a leading role in the popularization of sandbox games. More modern games that cite it as inspiration include Crackdown, Mafia,
Ooh.
Saints Row, True Crime, and Watch Dogs. The term Grand Theft Auto clone is frequently used to describe other video games released that have that similar open-ended gameplay design as Grand Theft Auto 3. While previous video games used open world design, including earlier Grand Theft Auto games, I mean, we can argue that the first two Grand Theft Autos were open world design. Grand Theft Auto 3 was the one that took that foundation, that gameplay foundation, and they expanded it into a real living, breathing 3D world. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I said I remember there were other games that tried it like Driver, but this was this was the first game that I felt it was a fully realized 3D world with living, breathing people in it. It took all those earlier concepts and magnified it to a level that we had never seen before. And it was nothing short
Would
of amazing.
would you say that it was a world you could live in?
It was a world you could live in. Yeah.
Then they accomplished what they set out to do.
And I mean, and this was age appropriate for me, right? Because in October of 2001, I was 17, and this was rated as a mature 17-year-old game. Like, this was age appropriate for me. So it probably came out for me at like the perfect time, right? Because I was the age that it was, I guess, designed for. Mature enough to handle it in a lot of ways. Not saying younger people aren't, but, you know, I was the target audience. Let's be honest. I was the target audience, right?
True.
And, you know, at 17, you're like, I don't know. I guess I was, I genuinely appreciated this for what it was. It was a technological marvel to me. It was something that I had never seen before, and I just remember being in awe of it and just wanting to go into the world just for the sake of being in it is the best way I could put it. I mean, yeah, we had the Grand Theft Auto and we had the Driver and other things, but I never had a desire to just load those games up and play in them with no goal in mind. Like, they weren't an open world sandbox the way this was. This was the first game that I can remember just being content to do stuff in the game without a goal in mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually 100%.
Yeah. So this one was something. We can argue that this game also led to the trend of mature video games. Dan Houser himself has said that he felt that allowed other developers to create violent shooters and do it legitimately. But in that same conversation, there are many others who also felt that it showed, as I was just talking about, that people could play video games that handle a mature subject matter in an appropriate way. Because there weren't a lot of mature games that were widely accepted before this. I mean, don't get me wrong, we had them. And we've talked about some of them before, but most of them were shunned or they were niche in some way. Like Mortal Kombat was mature, for instance, and we had our controversy around that. But there just wasn't a game that had it all around as this that as much I can recall. That wasn't as popular. It wasn't as widespread. I mean, this was a mature game that was the best-selling game of 2001 and the second best-selling game of 2002. There were no other mature games that can even hold a candle close to that because no one took mature games seriously before that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So by doing so, by creating a mature game in a way that was mature, in a manner that handled subject matter mature, they paved the way for other video game developers to start handling mature topics in the same way. So very much this laid the groundwork for video game development and video gaming culture to mature. This is very much a moment when the industry grew up, in my opinion, and it continued to grow up from there. I think, despite how you look at it, one thing that we can all agree on is that Grand Theft Auto 3 um, is one of the greatest video games of all time. It's cited that way by many, many publications, both for its gameplay in itself, a 97 out of 100 ain't bad, the way people looked at it, and for its influence. There is little to no doubt in how influential this game has been. You know, for all these reasons, its influence literally knows no bounds, and its gaming design, the groundwork that it laid, is still found throughout gaming to this very day. Very, very important title in the annals of gaming history. I have been on my soapbox for this one. Whoo wee.
And you
Hope you
said anal.
okay. All right. So it has cited a lot of other games, right? Crackdown Mafia, Saints Row, we did an episode on. You know, we learned about the earlier Grand Theft Autos. We learned about DMA Design. There's all these other stories that have culminated to this point, and I would highly suggest checking out those stories because it's interesting to have context for how we got there. You know, you can learn about DMA Design from their very beginnings all the way up until this point when they're acquired, become part of Rockstar, and then turn, with Rockstar's help, the Grand Theft Auto series into the 3D realm. Of course, if you want to check out any of these old stories, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
Well, you can find a calendar of our upcoming topics for the remainder of the year. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come talk with Dave and I. And you can find links to our social medias where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week,
Yep.
ladies and gentlemen. Or you're going to make fun of me? Is that what you were going to do?
No, I said, yep, you're right.
Okay, good. I held that note expecting you to make fun of me.
Well, I did. You just couldn't hear me because you were wrong.
True statement. Each week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It could be about a game, it could be about a person, a technology, a company, just something that I've deemed relevant to this week in gaming history. Most often it's about games, and I expand it into all the other stuff. While doing so, we hope to tell you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Every week when I sit down to do research, I learn something. That's my favorite part about doing this week after week after week. When I write stories, I learn. I love to learn things. And in turn, I genuinely enjoy teaching people new things. So it's this beautiful cycle for me of getting to learn new stuff and teach other people new things. And in celebration of that cycle, each week we go roundtable and we talk about what we learned, our takeaways for each day. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think my big takeaway is I had no idea that they had started development with the Sega Dreamcast. I don't know. It's just I only have one memory of that console, and I just always forget about it. So it's just weird to think that this could have been a Sega title, and who knows? This could have actually made Sega stay.
It could have. You're absolutely right about it.
But I just think that's pretty cool. Obviously it was a better push to push it to the PS2, and even if it was done for financial reasons, it was still a great thing that it was. But it's kind of cool. I always mention in my takeaways the what ifs, and this is a big what if. Would this game have been as successful if it was on the Dreamcast? Would it have saved Sega's console line, or would it be another flop and we wouldn't have GTA like we do now? Makes you think.
Makes you think.
So, what about yourself? What's your takeaway?
I I was going to use a Dreamcast thing too because I had no clue that they thought about putting this on a Dreamcast. I didn't even know. I didn't even know, right? Because Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2 were PlayStation ported, PlayStation Windows, but PlayStation. And I kind of assumed that relationship would have continued. I know the Dreamcast was an exciting piece of hardware for people. So a lot of, we've heard it in other stories before where a lot of developers had thought about swapping over to the Dreamcast, and then found out that that wasn't going to be the way to go and inevitably switched over to the PlayStation. So I'm not surprised, but I had no clue that Rockstar slash DMA Design had considered that whatsoever. So that was really fascinating. That was really fascinating to know that that's where they started. It was neat to learn that they prototyped on a Dreamcast. They spent 4 months. Two different teams spent months building their own versions of living, breathing cities on the Dreamcast, and then eventually they combined and took their combined expertise and turned it into the Grand Theft Auto that we know and love today. So I think that's really fascinating. So yeah. All right, Rob. Well, I guess on that note, before I take it out of here, is there anything else that you'd like to add to today's episode?
As always, I just got to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you enjoy getting to listen to Dave ramble on about some fantastic games and some other stuff sometimes.
Very true. Well, that brings us to the end of our chaotic journey through the streets of Liberty City. Grand Theft Auto 3 changed the face of gaming forever, setting a new standard for open world design, storytelling, and player freedom. Whether you spent your time completing missions or just causing mayhem, Grand Theft Auto 3 left a lasting legacy that continues to influence games to this day. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into one of gaming's most influential titles. Next week, though, we're traveling back to the late 80s to explore the launch of the NEC PC engine, known as the TurboGrafx 16 in North America. As one of the first consoles to introduce CD based gaming, the PC Engine was ahead of its time in many ways. We'll take a look at its impact on gaming, its incredible library of games, and why it struggled to compete against Sega and Nintendo. So grab your Hue cards and join us next week for yet another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do it up, ba ba da ba ba da ba da ba.